Welcome everybody. Another show today, and I'm talking to Ann Welch, who is an iconographer. So Ann will explain, but the reason I'm talking to Ann is because Coming With Me exhibition at Rochester Cathedral is on 10th of February to 17th of February. And Ann is one of the major icon painters, and she's contributing, and it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating, such detail, such technique. So I'm interested to find out more, and I'd just like to say welcome, Ann. Lovely to
see you.
Lovely. Ann, can you tell us how you started your painting or artistic journey, and how you came to look at icons in particular and specialize in icons?
Well, it was very circuitous, really, because I didn't have any art training. We didn't have any art lessons at school. And I thought it wasn't until I was in my teens and I went to the adult ed once a week and went to a painting class. What I did do, I was a window dresser at Liberties of London.
Oh,
but
lovely.
you know, Jasper John was window dresser, and so was Andy Warhol. And so I think there's something about that, because you're moving space, you know, you're having to think of an idea and you're having to move things around and you're having to look at all these different things and you're arranging something. It's just not a flat surface. So when I stopped that, there was a big hole somehow, you know, and I then started. I had a lot of friends at Manchester Art School, and I met a woman who wore batik that her father had sent her. He was working in Indonesia, and I became very interested in how that was made. So I went to Indonesia and I learnt traditional batik from the Sultan's children, because the Sultan's children, he had hundreds, and they lived in a certain quarter called the Batik Quarter in Yogyakarta. So I learned that, and that's where I started selling and working in an art form all the time. And but I eventually became a little allergic to the wax, and also had a child, and it was a very, very time-consuming thing. So someone asked me, she was running a watercolor class, and she asked me if I would go because she was down on numbers. So I did, and I was terribly excited about that. So I started doing watercolor after that. And then, of course, from the watercolor class, I met somebody else who said they knew a fantastic teacher in New York. I was living in New York then, and I went to visit his studio, and I worked with him in New York. He died, unfortunately. I always regret that I didn't go more days than I did. But that's how I started painting. And then I went to, when I was in Greece, I was always interested in icons in a way, because when we did the Liberty of London Christmas show, someone said, well, why don't we put icons in the window? Why don't we make these icons? You know, because they're always gold and silver and bright colors. Or I mean, thought of like that. They're not all like that, of course. So that's what I first heard really about icons. But I was very interested in medieval art, and you know, working in Liberties, you were seeing Morris designs and things like that all the time. So I became very. When I was in Greece, I had a friend who was very interested in icons, and he took me to all the museums with icons. And then, of course, when I lived there, I started to I became more interested, and I went on a coach trip with the village children and school teachers and women. And of course, they always go to some monastery or other. And I said, the only English speaking person was the doctor there, the first woman doctor we had. And I said, I wish, I wish I could paint icons. But, I said it like I wish I could go to the moon. I didn't think it was a possibility because I assumed then that only monks painted icons.
Yeah.
But of course, that's true because after all, in Rome, very early, there was a woman making, I don't know how many icons. So that wasn't really true. And at the time, quite recently, she's probably dead now. There was a nun down in Patmos who was painting a whole chapel and everything. But anyway, I had that idea. But that night I went home and I had this sort of dream, which sort of, it's strange because it said, well, why don't you do it? And it was like I was questioning my own assumption that I couldn't do it. And so I went to the next day, I asked the local priest, how can I learn to paint icons? And he sent me to an iconographer in a town that was about an hour away. And I learned the basics of icons from him. He was an orphan who had been brought up in Mount Athos, where there are, of course, a lot of iconographers. So I learned the basics from him, but he wasn't using the original. He wasn't using really the natural materials. He was using more synthetic paints, and he was probably using some. It seemed more like house paint to me. It was probably just paint. But I wanted to learn how it was done in medieval times. So when I went back to New York, I saw an advertisement at Pratt Art School for a Byzantine techniques class. So I went to that, and that was conducted by a woman called Barbara Meese, who was a restorer at the Cloisters Museum in New York. So I went to her, and then I found out her teacher, and her teacher was a Russian who had just come over from Russia, and his name was Vladislav Andreev, and there was a school, part of Washington University, that was, Washington Square, part of New York University, and that was called the School of Sacred Art, and you had Tibetan tanka painters and all this sort of. So I started with him.
Wow.
And then after that, I found many other teachers. But I didn't, we have another person who's in the show.
Yes.
And he is, of course, a real iconographer. I'm a bit more a jack of all trades. That I don't really call myself. I mean, I do. I have icons. I have an icon in Rochester Cathedral. Not now. I've just taken it out to restore. But and I have icons in churches, and of course I make icons. But I feel I'm always a student. Always a student. But Hannah is, she studied 3 years at the Prince's School, well now the King's School, and she's 4 years with Aidan Hart, who's a major iconographer.
So that's Hannah Lean.
That's Hannah Ward.
Hannah Lean Ward.
Yes. So I don't put myself in Hannah's class, but I work with Hannah. I'm too sloppy to be a really good iconographer. I tend to work, they should be planned. People plan them very much ahead. They're very careful. I'm not very careful. I don't plan. I tend to be a little more spontaneous when I do them. And then afterwards I say, oh dear, if only I'd have taken more trouble with that hand or something like that. So,
well, I'm very pleased that you've joined the exhibition because your contribution is beautiful. I've seen it.
Thank you. You know, I saw that now it was Mary Magdalene who is the one I've done. There are no really old icons of Mary Magdalene that aren't really Italian influenced. So that I could find. Since then, I've been trying to look for more, but I couldn't find them. So it had to be something that came out of my head. And I just sketched this drawing one day, and I thought, oh yes, that, you know, sketch this face. I thought, oh well, that's Mary Magdalene. That's going to be my Mary Magdalene. So I like this. I have to say, I quite like this one because there isn't another one like it.
Right. It's inspired as well. It's very inspired, but for the audience who are listening, you know, you must come and see. And if you haven't seen the actual exhibition, because you may be watching this retrospectively, you can go to the website and have a look. But the picture of Magdalene that you're talking about there, Anne, is beguiling. It's very beguiling with her eyes and her body. Brilliant. Yes, lovely. And so you're familiar with Rochester Cathedral then. How do you see it working with this wonderful table? I take it have you been to see the Fenland oak table?
You know, I've told everyone about that table because I went to see the light show thing.
Oh yes, yes.
You know,
yes.
And I thought, what's this big table doing here? I couldn't work out what the table was doing there. And then we saw the explanation of it. And I think that was absolutely marvelous. I think that was so fantastic to learn about a table that is made out of wood in such fabulous condition that is older than the pyramids is amazing. And what I also liked was it showed you how tall those black oak trees were at that time, and how everything is diminished. And I found that absolutely fascinating. I live on Lesbos, and we've got one of the I think there are about 5 petrified forests in the world, and we have one of them. So I'm used to seeing petrified trees. But the amazing thing about this is not really petrified, because you couldn't really make a table like that out of it. I just thought it was extraordinary, and I think everyone should go and see that table.
Yes, it's 5,000 years old. And I was talking to Canon Gordon the other day, and he mentioned that it's actually older than the Old Testament. And it's incredible. My mind went, woo. So yes, do go and see the table if you can find it anywhere in the country at the moment. It's going to do the rounds of the different cathedrals, if they can take it.
Where is the next one it goes to?
From Rochester, it's going to Lincoln. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's beautiful. And okay then. So what would you like the public who go to view this exhibition to understand about your painting and the exhibition itself? What do you think about art in a religious setting, particularly a Christian setting, and how do you think the public, or what do you think the public can gain from that? Because I'm taking my grandchildren, friends are taking their children, teenagers. You know, it's appealing across the board to people who are non-artists, people who are not necessarily Christian, gathering to see this.
Well, you know, I have to admit, it was silly because I was in Milan earlier in the year, and if I'd had more time, I could have gone to see this with the painting, the Leonardo da Vinci painting that it's based on. But when I was asked to do this, then of course I looked more at this painting, which is sort of it's been sort of bashed about quite a bit, hasn't it? And it's been restored, and lots of things have happened to it. So, and I was trying to look for some women in the painting, and of course the St. John. I mean, Leonardo made a lot of very rather effeminate men, and the one of St. John, the beautiful picture of St. John there. At first, I thought it was a woman, and then I realized, I read off. Of course, it wasn't. It was St. John. So I found, without having been asked to do this, I don't think I would have looked at that painting so much as I have done, and learned so much about that.
Well, that's the hope. Yes, that the hope is that that exhibitions like these, installations, especially where the public can actually come along and touch this, because we have some pottery as well that's been made by the pottery at Alresford Priory in the style of first century pottery, and so it's something that the public can engage with, and hopefully it will stimulate them to look at the major artists and question the, I mean, art in those days, Christianity, medieval times, Christianity in Europe was the main mindfulness, wasn't it? It was the main concept of life. And
we're so different from medievals. We're so very, very different.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get your head around how they really thought. Now with iconography, you can't do that. You can't play around like that too much. It has to, an icon has to have certain elements to it. The secondary things, maybe a landscape, things like that, you could change. But it's for instance, if you had a painting, you grew up with a photograph or something, or a painting of your old ancient aunt or something, and she always had red hair, and then someone shows you a painting of her with blonde hair, you might not recognize her. And with iconography, you're meant to almost instantaneously recognize who that person is.
Yes.
Now, if you change in the color of their clothes, and then it's very difficult to recognize who they are. In Greece, if I walk along with one of my icons from somewhere to somewhere, everyone immediately knows who it is. Also, it has to have a name on it. It has to have a name, so people know who that person is.
Right.
And that is by not changing too much of the image. This now with Mary Magdalene, if you look, many of the paintings of her she's wearing red. And I was interested why she was wearing red, because in there were books written like in the 16th century about what colors the saint should be painted in. And I looked at one that I have, and she's in green. And so I thought, well, why are the others that I see in red? And it's because they were made for the Crete, in Crete, often by Cretan artists. And she was green.
Yeah, I was just thinking then that it's really important to keep the traditions going, and the not just the images but also the techniques. And it's wonderful that you've learned so much and that you can produce these wonderful icons. I would just like to just finish off now, please, Anne. I could listen to you for hours and hours and hours. I think you have so much knowledge, experience, and understanding of art and its position in life. And I would just like to thank you for bringing some of that to us today, and for exciting me about the exhibition, and hopefully the audience here today. Thank you.
And also I should add, some of the other art. I see the artists you have, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them and their work as well. That's a wonderful collection you have.
There is a wide variety of artists and styles and techniques. So yes, it's very, very rewarding. So I'd just like to ask you then, Anne, if anybody wants to talk to you or look at your work, where would they find you? How can they contact you?
Well, it is a little difficult. Well, the best thing always is email.
Right.
And you can find my email would be on my website, which is Ann Welch, or one word, .co.uk.
Okay.
So email is always the best way to contact me.
There's people will have more questions. They'll be fascinated by you and your journey. And you've certainly opened up an important aspect of the exhibition for us. So I'd just like to thank you, and I'd like to say thank you to everybody for watching today. And I'm sure that if you'll come along, if you haven't been yet, and if you're watching this and it's already happened, do go to our website. Come eat with me, the pivotal moment when Jesus talks to his disciples and explains that one of them will betray him. Goodbye, everybody, and thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you.